I was getting my nails done on that Tuesday afternoon in 1999 when a special report came on television and showed us the scene at Columbine High School where students had evacuated, and we learned about the two boy shooters who'd armed themselves and gone in and killed their peers and their teachers. And it was such a shocking and unprecedented thing that I knew that I should just chuck whatever we had planned for that coming Sunday service and address this horrible event. And that's what we did, and that sanctuary was packed on that Sunday for 2 services. It was a large congregation. All of those 500 or so Unitarian Universalists and their friends and visitors needed to be together to grieve, to affirm our own values, to deal with the emotional and spiritual consequences to our community, because we are connected, and to the larger national community, not to mention our UU congregation in Columbine. To pray for the victims and to struggle with how to pray or whether to pray also for Eric and Dylan, who had committed this evil. Today we're gathered together again after how many massacres, how many mass shootings done by disgruntled, enraged, far-right, white nationalist men. And almost to a man, almost in every single one of these crimes, the perpetrators bear a deep hatred for people of color and also for women. If you check the criminal histories of most of these guys, you'll find domestic violence charges against them. They kill on high school and college campuses, at concerts, in hospitals, in office parks, movie theaters, and in houses of worship. And when they do, they destroy not only lives, but the fabric of a community. They tear it. They destroy many of their grieving victims' faith in humanity, at least for a while, and they desecrate the sacred. They become terrible ghosts, haunting everyone in their far-reaching concentric circles around the sites of their crimes, including their own family members and friends who thought they knew them. Today, a synagogue or a gay nightclub in Orlando. Tomorrow, a mosque in New Zealand. They are unified by an insane, ignorant ideology, which is promoted by our president and his ignorant, fearful, and irrational supporters in towns and online. And we who witness all of this, again and again and again, risk becoming numbed by these acts of terrorism. And maybe risk isn't the right word. Maybe because becoming numb is not a response that we choose. It's a biological and psychological defense mechanism. How in the world do we remain present to all of this? Or should we at all? I don't know. I cannot make a decision for all of us. We have to be aware of our own limitations, our own ability to take this in. I just know that spiritually we must remain awake, not hypervigilant or paranoid or giving in to self-serving dramatics, but awake. Today I had planned to reflect on the practice of presence with you, and I'm still going to do that. We are still doing that. I don't know this latest terrorist's name. I decided I don't want to know, or I don't care. I don't need to know that. I haven't read his manifesto. Not gonna. I will most certainly not search for the video recordings of his demonic action. I will not center him this morning or any other time, because his story and his motives do not interest me. And I want to tell you, I don't think they need to interest you at all yourselves. I feel like we know enough about these guys. And in this space, I'm not going to try to analyze them, but to grieve with you the loss, the chasm of grief that they create, to celebrate the lives, and to celebrate and have faith in the strengths of those who remain. This is a space for the building up of spiritual clarity and soul strength, for equipping the faithful to live out our lives with integrity and intention, grounded in a theological tradition that dares to make great assumptions about the ability of human beings to sow peace, connectedness, care, compassion, and wisdom wherever we are and among those whose lives touch ours. There is something more powerful and eternal and beautiful than all of that we deal with, all of the shocks and the disappointments and the fears and the terrors. In his beautiful poem, Tintern Abbey, William Wordsworth reflects on the emotions invoked in him when he's revisiting a really beautiful scenic location in his native England. It's near Tintern Abbey. And one stanza, he writes, "And I have felt a presence that disturbs me with the joy of elevated thoughts, a sense sublime of something far more deeply interfused, whose dwelling is the light of setting suns and the round ocean and the living air and the blue sky, and in the mind of man, a motion and a spirit that impels all thinking things, all objects of all thought, and rolls through all things." Have you experienced that? That motion and spirit that rolls through all things? This is to me a wonderful description of what I mean when I refer to the presence of the divine or the ultimate, something beyond what my five senses can experience. This happens for me when I'm by the ocean, looking into the caldera of a volcano, as I shared with you recently. When I was so absorbed in a film or a show that I experienced tremendous confusion when my watch seemed to have jumped forward an hour or two, because when I came out of the experience, I thought, oh, it's definitely, 4 o'clock, but it was like 5 or 6 o'clock. And I thought, wait, no, that's not possible, because that time got lost. It has happened for me, and I hope with you, in community silence, in prayer, or just holding a silence together. It's happened one time when I had a baby asleep on my chest. A presence that disturbs me with the joy of elevated thoughts. And disturb here is very close to that word we considered a couple of weeks ago, tokimeku, that Japanese term that has been interpreted as spark joy, but also means to cause the heart to pound or to flutter. Awake, alive, connected. The paradox here, though, is that when we are most fully aware of that transcendent presence and present ourselves, we are actually the least self-conscious, the least present to the self that we have constructed and that we really believe is who we really are. But there's something deeper than that. There's that saying, what did your face look like before you were born? Or what was the face that you had before you were born? I think it's a Chinese saying. And this is where I want to linger for a moment because it's a deep metaphysical concept and because I think that this is the heart of the practice of presence. It's letting the self slip off like a garment while we become fully absorbed in the larger than, the present with the capital P. I have the image of two friends in conversation. They're so eager to catch up with each other and to share their lives. They've sat themselves down at a table or on a couch, and they're so intently present to each other. They're so intently listening to each other on all of the levels with all of their senses. Their coats and their purses or their knapsacks have slipped to the floor and remain there totally unnoticed by either of them. Nothing else exists around them but the other. They are in the flow of friendship, of relationship, of each other's presence, and they are being held by that divine presence of life and love itself that moves always through each of them individually and through them when they are together. They have made the time and the space for that to be able to happen. On another day, one picks up the phone to text the other. Are you okay? I just got a spidey sense that you're not. Sure enough, the friend has been through something upsetting and hadn't said anything. How did the friend know? They have been practicing presence for so long. They don't live just in the space of the face-to-face, but in the spirit-to-spirit. And you know this is true. How many of you have experienced that? And I always know that the ministry I'm sharing with you all is great when I start to have the spidey sense, and you start to have the spidey sense about me. And I had that experience last week with one of you. I called someone. She said, "I was just thinking of you." The author Madeleine L'Engle writes, "When we are self-conscious, we cannot be wholly aware. We must throw ourselves out first. This throwing ourselves away is an act of creativity. So when we wholly concentrate like a child in play or an artist at work, then we share in the act of creating. We not only escape time, we also escape our self-conscious selves." And I love this. Throw yourself out. Or, as we say in a more casual way, get over yourself. To be fully present, we have to get out of our own way. I said last week that prayer is an interruption for me. I think presence is also in some ways an interruption. L'Engle reminds us that the Greeks had a word for ultimate self-consciousness, hubris, pride in the sense of putting oneself at the center of the universe. This self-consciousness invariably ends in self-annihilation, so the Greek tragedies tell us. And I would add that it also often ends in the harm or destruction of innocent others as well. Self-consciousness, which in its milder and more benign form manifests as awkwardness or insecurity, if left unchecked by the intentional practice of presence, can metastasize. The entire person becomes dedicated to imposing their version of reality on everyone around them. There is no check and balance within them. So they're not capable of relationship. They're not capable of being in community, whose very nature is understanding and compromise. Only the stories that they're telling themselves about what's really going on get airspace in their head. There's no room for anything but those stories, and they're only pretending to be present and listening and accountable in any relationship. This is a particular sickness of Donald Trump, who is so busy calculating deals and telling himself stories that he can't think beyond competitive outcomes of winners or losers and how his own ego self fares in the equation. And so I mention him specifically because he's such an important leader, and this quality is so dangerous. We are living in an era where our public discourse, if it can even be called that, is pathologically self-centered, and where there is no practice of presence. The group dynamic is tribal, defensive, and identity-based to a very alienating degree, combative and violent. There is aggressive move after aggressive move in words and in actions, a relentless pounding of ideologies, slogans, and positions. To withdraw, to deeply consider, to meet at a table in a curious or partnership or collaborative mode is to be a loser and a failure. So much spiritual violence in that environment. I don't want to participate in it. I want to be strong. I want us to be strong. But I also want us to be able to live in this world in a way that is responsive rather than reactionary. In this quest, we need to remember that there's a lot of wisdom in our bodies. We're animals, and we know and sense things through our skin, our sense of smell, our guts. The wholeness and groundedness that comes with being truly present can be very healing, because when we are present, we can notice what's happening in our bodies and be responsible for them. What was that experiment the sociologists conducted several years ago when they asked people to sit and maintain eye contact for 4 entire minutes with one other person? Do you remember that? And they weren't allowed to speak. And what they found was that people who did this fell in love. And I've never forgotten that. Because that's so radical. As opposed to sitting there and like waiting for what you're going to say and like thinking about your stories about who you are and who's right. And you're just like regarding this other person, just maintaining eye contact, just like being animals together. And then this thing happens. That's really just so radical. I dare you to try it sometime. Even with someone you live with, whose love you think is already well established. Try it at a meeting. Just maintain eye contact, be present to another human being. You will both realize how powerful you are, how much you matter. The deep self emerges. You may realize that just your presence, your full attention to the moment is transformative, and not because you had a brilliant idea, and not because you offered brilliant advice, and not because you fixed anything. Do we not know by now that there is very rarely anything we can do to fix what hurts, what is broken? Parker Palmer is a Quaker teacher, and he has very wise words about presence. He says the human soul doesn't want to be advised or fixed or saved. It simply wants to be witnessed, to be seen, heard, and companioned exactly as it is. When we make that kind of deep bow to the suffering, to the soul of a suffering person, our respect reinforces the soul's healing resources, the only resources that can help the sufferer make it through. How to be present? Show up. Be more curious than critical. Be absorbed. Don't focus as much on gathering information, preparing your defense, getting your point across as you do on breathing, on being. Let animals who are experts on simply being present be your spiritual directors. Remember that no one of us is the expert interpreter of reality or an entirely reliable narrator of the story. Remember the Buddhist monk who approached the hot dog vendor in Central Park. When the hot dog vendor asked the monk what he wanted, the monk replied, "Make me one with everything."